To understand the sheer magnitude of the struggle behind the Alamo, one must first understand the man who stood at its center. By the year 1959, John Wayne was not merely an actor. He had become a living monument, a towering figure of American masculinity and traditional values. Yet, behind the iconic swagger and the steady gaze, there was a man deeply troubled by the shifting tides of the world around him. The 1950s were drawing to a close, and a new era of cynicism was beginning to take root in Hollywood. The classic heroes Wayne had portrayed for decades were being replaced by darker, more conflicted figures. The Duke felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, and he knew that if he wanted his legacy to endure, he had to create something that would stand the test of time. This obsession did not start in a boardroom or at a premiere. It started in the quiet moments of reflection in Wayne's private study, where he pored over the history of the 1836 siege. For 15 long years, he carried this story in his heart like a burning coal. He saw the defense of the Alamo as the ultimate expression of the human spirit, a story of men who knew they were going to die, yet chose to stay and fight for a principle greater than their own lives. To Wayne, this wasn't just Texas history, it was a universal manifesto on freedom. He spoke of it with a religious intensity. He believed that if he could just put this vision on the silver screen, he could remind a changing world of what it meant to have true courage. But the path from vision to reality was paved with rejection. Every major studio head in Hollywood looked at Wayne's sprawling, 3-hour script and saw a financial disaster waiting to happen. "Duke," they would tell him, "nobody wants to see a movie where the hero dies at the end. And nobody wants to pay $12 million for a history lesson." The giants of the industry, men who had made millions off Wayne's back, suddenly had no room for his dream. They wanted him to stay in the box they had built for him, the dependable cowboy who always rode off into the sunset. They didn't want the director. They didn't want the philosopher. They wanted the product. This rejection was the first great battle of the Alamo, and it was one that John Wayne had to fight in the cold, lonely offices of Los Angeles before he ever stepped foot in the Texas dust. When the doors of the major studios slammed shut, John Wayne did something that sent shockwaves through the industry. He decided to go to war alone. He walked away from the security of a guaranteed salary and formed his own production company, Batjack. But founding a company was merely the beginning of a descent into a financial abyss. Wayne knew that to tell the story of the Alamo correctly, he couldn't use cardboard sets or cheap tricks. He needed a budget that was unheard of for its time, $12 million. In today's economy, that is a staggering amount, exceeding $120 million. Hollywood's elite watched with a mixture of mockery and disbelief. They called it Wayne's Folly. They expected the Duke to crawl back to the studios, humbled and defeated. But they underestimated the iron will of the man. When the traditional banks refused to lend him the full amount, Wayne turned to his own life's work. He began a desperate process of liquidation and collateralization that terrified his closest advisors. He mortgaged his sprawling ranch in Arizona, a place he loved deeply. He signed away the rights to his future earnings for years to come. He even put up his personal houses and his beloved private yachts as security for the loans. This was not just a business decision. It was a total commitment of his soul. His wife, Pilar, watched as their financial security evaporated into a dream of Texas dust. Every time Wayne signed a contract, he was essentially betting his children's inheritance on a movie. The stress was immense. He spent his nights pacing the floors, staring at balance sheets that didn't add up, and his days acting as a high-stakes salesman. He traveled across the country, meeting with Texas oil tycoons and wealthy cattlemen, using every ounce of his legendary charm to convince them to join his crusade. He was a man possessed, driven by a vision that no one else could see, and carrying a debt that would have crushed a lesser human being. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, and instead of stepping back, he decided to jump, trusting that his passion would provide him with wings. With the financing finally secured through a mixture of desperation and ironclad willpower, the production moved to the desolate plains of Brackettville, Texas. John Wayne didn't want a movie set. He wanted a resurrection. He hired James Papworth, a master of construction, with a simple but impossible command: build it real. Over the next 2 years, a small army of workers labored under the brutal Texas sun to create a full-scale replica of the Alamo mission. They manufactured over 1 million adobe bricks by hand, using the same traditional methods as the original builders in 1836. This was not a facade of plywood and paint. It was a functioning town, complete with a massive church, sprawling barracks, and a plaza that breathed with the dust of history. The environment was a silent predator. Temperatures regularly spiked above 105 degrees, turning the set into a literal oven. But the heat of the sun was nothing compared to the heat of the pressure Wayne felt as a director. He was no longer just the star. He was the general of an army of 5,000 extras and 1,500 horses. Every hour of daylight was a race against a budget that was hemorrhaging money. Wayne arrived on the set at 4 in the morning, long before the first hint of dawn, and was often the last man to leave well after midnight. His health began to pay the ultimate price for his obsession. He was smoking 5 to 6 packs of unfiltered cigarettes every single day, his lungs struggling to process the thick Texas dust and the constant stress. His cough became a terrifying sound on the set, a deep, rattling reminder of the toll this project was taking on his body. Doctors warned him that he was on the verge of a physical collapse, but the Duke refused to yield. He was driven by a sense of duty that bordered on the fanatical. He lived in a trailer on the set, surrounding himself with maps, historical documents, and the weight of $12 million in debt. He was a man consumed by his own creation, watching as the lines between his real life and the legend he was filming began to blur into a singular, desperate mission. As the filming of the climax approached, the atmosphere on the set grew increasingly dark. The physical exhaustion was no longer the only enemy. Tragedy began to strike the production in ways that felt almost supernatural. A stuntman lost his life during a high-speed scene, and a sense of gloom descended over the thousands of workers in Bracketville. Rumors of a curse began to circulate in the tabloids. John Wayne, however, refused to let the darkness win. He was obsessed with the final battle, the moment the Mexican army would breach the walls of the mission. He wanted the audience to feel the vibration of the earth under the hooves of 1,500 horses. He wanted the smell of sulfur and gunpowder to be almost tangible through the screen. The financial pressure had now reached a breaking point. Wayne was not just losing sleep. He was losing his grip on his health. He suffered from chronic chest pains and a cough that sounded like grinding stones. Yet he was the first man to mount his horse every morning. He was managing a budget that had ballooned far beyond his initial estimates, reaching over $12 million. Every mistake, every retake, was a nail in the coffin of his personal fortune. He was a king without a treasury, leading an army of actors through a desert of debt. Yet, when he stood on those adobe walls, looking out at the vast Texas horizon, he didn't see a movie set. He saw the ghosts of the men who had died there in 1836, and he felt a sacred duty to finish what he had started, no matter the cost to his heart or his wallet. When the cameras finally stopped rolling after months of grueling work, Wayne was a shell of his former self. He had lost weight, his hair had grayed, and he was facing a future of total bankruptcy. But as he looked at the miles of film they had captured, he knew he had something that money couldn't buy. He had captured the spirit of a legend. The struggle to finish the film had become as epic as the Battle of the Alamo itself. He returned to Hollywood not as a conquering hero, but as a man who had survived a war. He began a desperate race against time to edit the footage, knowing that if the film failed at the box office, everything he had built in his 30-year career would vanish in a single night. The premiere of The Alamo was not the triumph John Wayne had envisioned. While the public flocked to see the spectacle, the Hollywood elite and the critics were waiting with sharpened knives. They found his fierce patriotism to be outdated and his aggressive campaign for the Academy Awards to be in poor taste. Wayne found himself alienated from the industry he had helped build. He spent the next decade of his life working tirelessly, taking almost every role offered to him, even the ones beneath his talent, just to pay back the interest on the massive loans that had funded his dream. He was a man working for the banks, yet he never once complained. He had made his choice, and he was prepared to live with the consequences. But as the years passed, the debt was eventually cleared, and something remarkable happened. The critics' voices began to fade, replaced by the enduring love of the audience. The Alamo became more than a film. It became a staple of American culture, passed down from fathers to sons. People began to see the movie for what it truly was, a soul-bearing confession from John Wayne about what he believed made life worth living. It was a story about the refusal to surrender, even when the odds are impossible and the end is certain. Wayne had looked into the abyss of failure and refused to blink, proving that a man's character is not defined by his wealth, but by the risks he is willing to take for his principles. Beyond the legend of the Duke, beyond the cowboy hat and the silver screen, there was a human being who sacrificed his security for a vision. John Wayne left behind a monument that still stands today, both the set in Bracketville and the film itself. He taught a generation that greatness always comes with a price, and that some dreams are worth more than gold. In his final years, he looked back at the struggle of the Alamo not with regret, but with pride. He had stood his ground. He had kept his word. And in doing so, he secured his place not just in Hollywood history, but in the heart of the legend itself. This is Beyond the Legend. Thank you for staying with us on this journey through the life of a true icon.